Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hello and welcome to the April 10th Planning Commission meeting for the City of Half Moon Bay. We need to do the first item on our agenda, which is the roll call.
All right, thank you. Commissioner DeMond?
Here.
Commissioner Benjamin?
Here.
Commissioner Evans is not here today. Vice Chair Holt?
Here.
And Chair Hernandez?
I am present. Now that we're accounted for, we have the approval of minutes from the Tuesday, March 27th, 2018 meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the meeting's minutes?
I'd just say thank you for the revised minutes. They look great. I move to approve.
Do I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving right along. So now we have public comment. If anybody would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, I would ask that you step up to the green mic. If you could fill out a green comment card later, that's fine. You don't have to do it right now, so please. Yes. Do you need to have the green light needs to be solid?
Okay, the green light's solid. I read in the review that there was some discussion of limiting hosted Airbnbs to 60 days. I know that some cities have limited unhosted like that, but I think that's one of the most restrictive Airbnb. There's just been talk of it, and I know there's been no action. My name is Tim Pond, and I've lived on the coast for 30 years. I've lived down on Potter Street for about 9 years or 8 years. I fixed up an old farmhouse down there, and I have a master bedroom suite that I rent out continually on Airbnb. And it really helps me out financially, but I want to point out that the hosted Airbnbs are entirely a different animal from the unhosted ones. Insofar as I am there, I don't permit any noise past 9 o'clock. I totally vet everybody that comes into my house, as other people would who come into their own house to stay. And I have a clientele that comes repeatedly for a number of reasons. Some of them, a lot of people are locals who have kids that live in the neighborhood that want to come home, or parents that live in the neighborhood, grandparents that come in, college students that come in who live in the neighborhood and they want a place to stay. I've had cancer treatment people from Stanford. I've had heat retreat people from Central Valley, repeat customers that come out. And I don't see any of the neighborhood negative impacts of parking or traffic that I guess was spoken about at the meeting that I missed. I don't really think there's a problem with these hosted Airbnbs, as I can see, and I really like my neighborhood character. I'm out in front of my house working, and I know all my neighbors. Some of them have had people come to stay with me, and I really think that, you know, I'm very involved in keeping Half Moon Bay as it is, as a welcoming, open community. And there is, too, this element of making the coast accessible to people that could not afford to come here. And I think that's really important, because the Coastal Commission actually went so far as to agree with this element as well, that we need to, and there's no substantial development in allowing people to do this in their homes. And I don't think you're going to see this mass rush of people doing Airbnb. They probably would have done it already. So probably it's WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. You're not going to get this huge influx of people all of a sudden trying to make money. Now, I'm 55 years old. I got teenage kids that are in and out. I want to stay in the house I'm in, and this really helps me pay my $11,000 a year tax bill. I'm a superintendent for a construction company over the hill. I'm pro-controlled growth. I'm a person that's involved in community in different ways. And I just wanted to make my opinion heard here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Okay. I'm going to close the public comment, and we're going to move on to the first public hearing item. So we have a project on 390 Myrtle Street, PDP 18001. Scott, do you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. As mentioned, this is a new house proposed at 390 Myrtle Street, and the project itself includes a 1,010 square foot single-story house with a 56 square foot front porch. Curb, gutter, and sidewalk would be required as a condition of approval for construction of the new house along both frontages, Second and Myrtle. 2 uncovered parking spaces would be located within the rear and access from Second. Landscape plan was submitted that includes a lemon yellow cypress tree in the front yard. And permits requested include a coastal development permit, architectural review, front yard setback variance, street facing side setback variance, as well as parking exception. Now the project design was previously reviewed by the Planning Commission during a study session in February. Staff report did note January, by the way, which is a typo. Apologize about that. Planning Commission primary direction was to decrease the building height to a more compatible height with the surrounding neighborhood, eliminate the loft space due to building code concerns, increase the size of the bay window to provide more functionality, shift the building footprint north to conform to the conceptual front yard setback of the neighboring houses along Myrtle, and modify the parking area to include the required parking spaces entirely on the subject property and avoiding the utility easement in the back area. Since that time, revised plans have been submitted that substantially address the concerns of the Planning Commission. And upon receiving that, the current plan set, the meeting this evening was duly noticed, and the story poles were revised to reflect the new design. This slide indicates is a photograph of the revised story poles. And here's the new site plan. And the main change on the site plan is, as I mentioned earlier, the shifting of the footprint north. And what I tried to do here is indicate where the previous footprint was with the red box here. Also, the parking has been revised in the back. You'll notice that a grading and drainage plan was also prepared since the study session, as well as a geotechnical report for the new house, and that was included in your packet. So just as a reference, here's the previous design, front elevation facing Myrtle. And here's the new design. Notice the height has been decreased by almost 4 feet, and the loft space has been eliminated. Here's the previous design that faces 2nd Avenue. And here's the new. And again, notice the change in height. This slide indicates, emphasizes the 2 additional architectural elements that were added, an additional shed dormer, as well as an additional bay window in the master bedroom. Previous design for the west-facing elevation. Not a huge change, some modifications to the windows and the decrease in height. Now, in regard to the the findings, as I mentioned earlier, there is a unique circumstance applicable to the property. It's the narrowness of the site, and which basically allows us to make the findings for the requested variances. And a thorough review of the chain of title that was submitted with the application concluded that the subject property was legally subdivided and is considered a legal lot. Let's see. Now, let's see. Other key considerations that we took a look at during review of this application was, in regard to the local coastal program, the local resources, accessibility, and growth management. They were issued a Measure D allocation for this residence. As far as the our certified housing element, it does contain policies that encourage the development of a range of type of housing, including smaller, more affordable units, which what you're reviewing tonight certainly fits into that, that policy guidance. As far as the zoning regulations, the site does meet our definition of severely substandard lots, which allows for a decreased, some flexibility as far as setbacks and parking. Now a little more on the setbacks. As far as the variances for the setbacks, street-facing side setback, this is really critical for being able to design a architecturally compatible house with the surrounding neighborhood and functional house. Without this variance, we would be left with roughly 8 feet of house width, which we've decided that it really wouldn't be possible to design a house that's 8 feet wide. The current design does maintain the site distance along the street corner. Now, as far as the front yard setback, this is something that the Planning Commission suggested during the study session, that we encourage the applicant to submit for a front yard setback as well, and the new design reflects that. Normally 25 feet is required. They've decreased that to 20 feet, which is more consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. Now, as far as the parking exception goes, they have requested to eliminate the enclosed parking requirement of 2 garage spaces. And part of this is that the narrowness of the lot, just a 2-car garage or carport really wouldn't fit well on the site, whether it was accessed from Myrtle or Second. Myrtle would be too close to the corner. Accessing a garage from Second Avenue wouldn't allow for a long enough, the minimum driveway length. So in that aspect, we think that the parking exception is justified. And in general, the space is well designed and landscaped to accommodate the cars and the open space. Now, as far as neighborhood compatibility, let's see, the house would contribute to the overall surrounding neighborhood. Right now the site is, it's kind of been a dumping ground for trash and refuse, and developing the site with a new house and curb gutter and sidewalk would certainly improve the surrounding neighborhood. Now you'll notice that in your packet within the plan set there was a optional carport, and we've identified some concerns with this. We've discussed it with the applicant. This was really put in as an option, but the reality is this would require several more variances, and it's the conversations we've had with the applicant is that it's he seems okay with not moving forward with a carport. With that, we suggest the Planning Commission provide any clarifying questions, conduct public comment, and then discussion, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Just before we get started, while I live on 2nd Avenue, the property in question is not what would be considered a conflict for me. I have had ex parte communications with the neighbors to the south and to the immediate west of the property prior to this evening.
I should mention as well, I live a block and a half to the east of the site, but outside of the 500-foot limit. So
So clarifying questions for Scott?
Just one. So, on the previous slide, you mentioned curb, gutter, and sidewalk are going in. I think at one point there was talk about where those, at the study session, we talked about, you know, which of the two sides, if both of the two sides, or was in particular, was Second Street going to get treated with curbs and gutters or not? Can you just remind us where we are in this proposal with respect to treatment of those things?
Yes, there was some discussion about the frontage improvements at the study session, and the discussion revolved around the material of the walking surface for Myrtle. As I remember, there wasn't any, extensive discussion about going with something different on the Second Avenue frontage. That it does make sense to extend that sidewalk along Second. I think it would be Public Works' preference to go with curb gutter sidewalk, but I think it's certainly in the purview of the Planning Commission to, discuss, some changes to that.
So that was just, I wasn't advocating, that's just clarifying. Thank you.
So when we first moved to Half Moon Bay, which is about 8 years ago, there was sort of a different view on these types of lots. I know you briefly, in the fact that they were largely viewed as undevelopable. In talking to one of the neighbors, this is a general view that was conveyed to them that it would be very hard to develop. And I'm curious, Scott, if you could elaborate a little bit on what changed in the last 8 years, if you have that background, if you'd be able to.
Certainly, I can provide some feedback on that. The exact message was conveyed to the current applicant as well. Given that the site is 21 feet wide, and it's unclear whether or not it would, at the time, whether it would be possible to design an architecturally compatible house for the surrounding neighborhood on a 21-foot wide lot. The current applicant moved forward with submitting an application along with a complete chain of title. And at that time, we extensively reviewed the chain of title and, via our legal services. And the conclusion is that we have a legal lot. So that's really the two critical items: is the lot legality and the compatibility of the architecture. The housing element as well. That we do have some policy within the housing element that encourages more affordable, smaller units.
Just to clarify that last point, there was a change in policy at the City Council's direction in terms of the housing policy element.
Yes.
And that happened about 4 or 5 years ago? 3 years ago?
Certified in 2015.
Okay, thank you. I have no other clarifying questions. If the applicant would like to, go ahead.
So, Scott, these are, I guess, process questions, one of which is, why does this home require 2 sewage permits? Could you give me a background on that? 2 benefit sewer units required.
Yes, and it's we get this question a lot at City Hall because it's kind of a a strange way to approach it. It's so 2 benefit sewer units per single family house. So so there was a sewer assessment done that assigned 2 benefit sewer units to each property that was included in the sewer assessment. Some of the properties were not assessed, so it's a matter of equaling the properties that were assessed, which includes 2 benefit sewer connections. So
Yeah, I'm trying to get my my mind on this. So, in effect, are they taxed for 2 permits? Is that the implication of having 2 beneficial permits, and is this a statute that somewhere it says each house in this area requires 2? I'm just trying to get some
Yes, that's
background on
correct.
that.
So,
Great, thank you for that one. Second one,
Sorry, Scott, each house in the neighborhood requires 2 sewer permits? Is this, or the,
every new house south of Frenchman's Creek.
okay, great,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah, so anything north of that would be in the Granada Community Services District, and they would need to go to Granada's Community Services District for sewer rights. So,
second question is also from a process standpoint. I noticed that there was a geotechnical report. I'd not seen one of these. Tell me what the requirement was for this report, why, and everything that goes along with that one.
normally this is required during the building permit phase. We thought it would be beneficial for the planning commission to have the geotechnical report and now. Now, as far as the grading and drainage plan, we normally require that during the planning submittal, and that was included as well. Identifying the location of the stormwater detention basin and identifying how the stormwater is going to be managed on this site. So,
Will this kind of report now be required for all new homes, or was this singled out for that
they are
purpose?
typically required during the building permit phase for all new houses.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to follow up on Les's question, I did not seek a geotechnical report. I wasn't engaged in that decision at all. But reading it and keeping in mind the proximity of this home to the adjacent home and the fact that we live in a seismically active location, it was, I think it's helpful to get a sense of whether this home could harm the adjacent home because of its proximity. So in a situation where there was a full setback, maybe it wouldn't be as valuable as it might be in a situation like this. That was my own thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of raised just from future standpoint, whether we are setting a precedent here and what the rationale is. So thank you.
We have a little more information for you. I think it's important to note, we requested the preliminary grading and drainage plan as well as the landscape plan to fill out your packet since for the information that you have for this project since the study session. We didn't feel you needed those two things for a study session. The applicant provided those as well as sections of the building, which is another request that we had. They provided the geotech report, and we don't always require it. I think it was a good choice for this particular project. We won't require it for every single project if we don't feel that it's necessary, but everyone does need to end up doing it for their building permits. So there's something good about having it done early if we have something extraordinary about a property, perhaps a water course, a slope, other setback kinds of issues, etc. So we're going to work on what is reasonable for our applicants, and we appreciate any feedback you have about that.
My final question is, you brought up the idea of having a parking covered structure in the back there. Number one, tell me why that would require a variance. Secondly, if there's a pad there and sometime in the future the homeowner puts an accessory building on there, which is not typically requires a permit, how might that differ from what we're saying over here?
So the first question, in regard to the carport, as shown on the first site plan and the elevations, it would put the site over the maximum allowed lot coverage, for one. Number two, the maximum allowed height for any accessory structure within 5 feet of the rear property line is 8 feet, and the carport exceeds that height. So essentially, we would be looking at 2 additional variances. Also, the setbacks. The other part of that is just the carport would not be architecturally compatible with the house. So that was a concern. Now, if the planning commission were to move forward with approval of this project, they would be required to maintain those 2 off-street parking spaces. If they decided to, you know, if this owner or any future owner decided to build an accessory structure in the backyard, they wouldn't be able to do that because they're required to maintain the 2 off-street parking spaces. So,
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open it up for public comment. If the applicant would like to speak, I would give them an opportunity to speak first. And then I have 2 comment cards. For those of you who would like to comment, if you could fill out a card if you haven't already done so, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Sue Taylor. I'm a building designer, and I specialize in designing historic type buildings and restoration of historic buildings. And Randy and I have actually been working together in Half Moon Bay for about 20 years. And we have had, I think this is the first time that there's been an issue with any of the designs that we've done in the past. So we've adjusted the plan according to the feedback that was given by this commission and the planning staff. And so basically I'm just here if you have any questions. And I'm really happy to, after I sit down, I know that there's a lot of deliberation that will happen. And if something comes up, I'd be really happy to come up and address anything or issue that comes up in your deliberations. So any questions?
I had one question. The height you settled on after the previous planning commission meeting, it still strikes me as substantially taller than the house next door, and it's taller than any house in the immediate area. Why did you settle on the 17-foot?
So basically
plus
we're trying to give it that craftsman style look, and not, and so it's got a raised floor to it. Otherwise you'd have it on a slab with no porch, and it's got basically 9-foot walls to give it some feel to it, and then a 8-12 pitch with, and the shed dormer is actually under the daylight plane. So it's pretty minimal. We actually started from the back at grade level and came across, there's about a foot difference in elevation on the site. So the back is 16 feet and the front is 17 feet, basically. So that's kind of how that ended up with that height.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to open it up for public comment. I have 2 cards, one from Eugene Thorset and then one from James Goulart. And one from Tim Pond after that. So, Eugene? Oh, sorry. Apologize. You're for 300 Main Street. Mr. Goulart? Tim, would you like to go first? Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, my name is Tim Pond. I've lived here 30 years. I live in the neighborhood. And I do have a
Groundhog
permit.
Day.
I do have my TOT taxes paid on the Airbnb, by the way. Anyway, I like the idea of small houses in the neighborhood. I think they speak to the demographic that we're all facing of needing smaller homes as a community and as a whole world. We need to look at smaller spaces. I like the design of the house, and I like the fact that this lot is getting filled in. I've ridden by it many times and seen it there. Anyway, I know it's hard when you have a house and people are building next to you, and I actually have 2 lots on either side of my house, one of which is about to be built. And today I called the contractor and I said, would you like to use the power from my house so I don't have to hear the generator running until you get your, power running? Because infill development is extremely important for a number of reasons. I'm sure you all know. It takes pressure off development in general outside of our urban boundaries, which we hold very dearly, our urban boundary. And I'd like to increase the density of our neighborhoods to a point where these infill lots are taken care of as well, because as it was mentioned, this lot was filled with firewood and chips, and I'm sure rodents lived in it, but I don't need to go that far. And anyway, I like the design. I like the Craftsman design. And I'm glad I was here by accident to speak for it.
Thank you, Tim. Mr. Goulart?
Thank you. My name is James Goulart. I live at 380 Myrtle Street, which is adjacent to the property here. We spoke at the planning meeting, and the design is definitely changed a lot from that planning discussion meeting that we had. Specifically, the face of the home that's facing our lot. And excuse me, the time wasn't reset, so I have more than a minute. Just wanted to bring that up. That slide. The 3 or 4 windows to the south were not on the original, if I believe. Yeah, there was the one small one. So this whole project is based on variances. There are rules about building on certain properties. This property, I believe it was brought up. Sorry. That there were changes to allow this to happen. That was a question you brought up, Mr. Hernandez, to Mr. Phillips. And I don't think the lot legality had changed at all. It had to do with the viewpoint from the city, and I still don't think that it fits within the viewpoint of the city. This does not fit the neighborhood. The look of it, again, has been brought up about the roof design completely out of the neighborhood viewpoint, especially with the historical look of the view of the home that's on 2nd and Filbert, which was required to stay as it is, with the more flatter design. We would request that the Planning Commission take a look at that the building have an equal distance from our property line as we have from our property line. They have to have from ours, which would be an increase that they don't have. Maybe require some noise abatement on the west side of their building to take care of that because of the close proximity to our home. They've talked about that, or actually Scott brought up that we think parking exception is justified. I have not seen any traffic surveys or studies about that. I have 30 plus years of traffic experience. I've testified in court, San Mateo Superior Court as a traffic expert, and that area is a school crossing intersection. It has a painted yellow crosswalk for school, and because of that, and I see your look, Rick, it's on the east side, which would not be affected by the sidewalk, but you're now causing children to walk on the sidewalk to an area that does not have the yellow crosswalk. So there needs to be a traffic study here for when these children cross over here to go through the alleyway to get to their schoolway. And because of the house being here, you're talking about limiting also the viewpoint at the intersection, causing more traffic congestion. Therefore, a traffic study should be done prior to this being approved. We believe that this may be causing an overcrowded situation as applies to the parking variance, possibly causing parking on the street because they are allowing for the 2 parking spots, but depending on how many people are in that home, you could have parking on that street, again causing a traffic concern, again necessitating a traffic study. The eve setback, I believe, sets on the, unless it's been changed from the previous, was approximately 1 foot. We're asking for a 3 foot. So my last thing is not a comment. It is a request to have the record remain open for 7 days for further written comments and to provide for due process for rebuttal of the testimony and new evidence that has been provided at this study, or at this session. Thank you.
Sir? Sir? Just for, I'm opening this up. You indicated you're an expert on traffic. Could you please state your credentials?
Yes, I've been a peace officer for 25 years, and part of my duties, both with the City of San Carlos and the County of San Mateo as a deputy sheriff, were as a traffic officer, doing enforcement for traffic laws, and specifically worrying about the traffic safety in and about school zones, both in the city of San Carlos and the areas that are provided traffic enforcement by the county of San Mateo.
Thank you. Thank you. If anybody else would like to speak, this is your opportunity. Seeing no other public comments, I'm going to close the public comment and redirect back to the Planning Commission for discussion. Gentlemen.
I wanted to follow up on a couple of items that came up from the public hearing. So question to our attorney. The last speaker, Mr. Gillard, discussed the opportunity an interest in the opportunity to provide additional testimony. The only way I can see that would happen is if we were to continue the item, or perhaps if it was an item that had been addressed at least tangentially, it had been brought up in some way, for example, through his testimony, that he could provide supporting evidence to make that argument during an appeal of a decision. Is there another way that he could provide additional input that would be pertinent to the Planning Commission's decision?
Sort of on. I'll repeat what I said for the for the purposes of the record. So there is due process provided at this hearing as an opportunity to respond to the evidence that was made publicly available in the materials and the testimony that was provided here. If the Planning Commission wanted to keep the hearing open and allow for additional evidence to be submitted, it could continue the hearing to a later date. That's not required under the law. And as you mentioned, there is an opportunity to appeal any decision of the Planning Commission that's made tonight.
Point of information, can this project be appealed to the City Council?
I believe, no, but yep, it would be. Sorry.
Can
I'll
this
defer to
project be appealed to the City Council?
Yes.
Yes, the project can be appealed to the City Council, but it's outside of the Coastal Commission appeals jurisdiction. So the final decision will be with the City Council.
If it's appealed to the City Council, is there a fee for an appeal?
Yes, it's $216.
Okay, thank you.
So as a follow-up to that question then, through the chair, I understood in the abstract idea that one of the public speakers was interested in providing rebutting evidence. I'm trying to figure out if there's any new evidence that is being presented, and I'd like to revisit the question, perhaps, of whether there's some reason to think that there might be additional evidence. I did hear questions about public safety for school crosswalks. I don't recall hearing that before. But it seems to me if anybody has a concern about providing evidence in response to that, it might be the applicant, or perhaps corroborating evidence in order to firm up the concern. Other than that, I'm not sure what additional evidence we might receive. I want to be sure that we've given this a thorough public hearing, but I also respect the applicant's schedule. So trying to get clarity on that. Maybe we'll have a chance to get clarity on what kind of evidence there might be talked about after we get everything focused tonight before we vote.
Well, I think the only point that's been raised that, in my view, would merit consideration by the Planning Commission is the question of the crosswalk. And I walked the property a couple of times this weekend and walked around it. I'm trying to think, I know where the crosswalk is on the opposing street. And so it's an issue that's been raised by somebody who's credentialed expert. So that's an item that we can talk about, is do we have a continuation so that we can address that issue or not?
Okay, thanks. So, turning to the broader questions away from process and now to the substance of the application, I want to thank the applicant for the revisions in design that came up. I too wish that the roof might be lower, but I understand the design trade-offs that you were talking about to the extent a layman can. I am of the opinion that the carport is less desirable in general. I had a lot of anxiety as I read the staff report about variances, because I understand that it's our responsibility to be respectful and look for ways to make something happen. And it reminded me that, and I hope some of my colleagues on the commission, that perhaps 15 years ago, an earlier planning commission proposed a process for considering applications on severely substandard lots such as this one that would facilitate, the intention was to facilitate smaller homes that would provide a greater variety and would do so without the requirement of a variance. I continued, and I understand that that was unpopular, and subsequent city councils repealed much of that thinking. I think we're looking at a poster child of why, if that wasn't the right idea, it should be incumbent on us to find something that does facilitate orderly development on a substandard lot that can address the concerns of the applicant and the adjacent neighbors. So I'm hopeful, or I guess I would like to put it as a trial balloon, the possibility, if staff thinks that this is something that they could do something with, that we invite them to provide us with some thoughts. It could be a very minor change to some of our existing zoning and facilitate a more orderly, easier process that's more amicable. Not that anyone's been unseemly, everybody's been very nice, but that would make it an easier process for everyone to move forward with on future situations. And as I think Commissioner Damon mentioned, this is not the last single small lot we're going to see over our time. So that's not material to tonight's decision on this project. But with respect to the variances, I'm of the school of thought that says fewer variances are better, and for that reason alone, I would be not supportive of the carport approach. I'd ask that we, I hope my colleagues would agree that the project would stand better without it, and the maintenance of the parking on that site would prevent the ADU structures that Commissioner Damon, I think, had some reservations about. I tried hard to get past the proximity of this home to the adjacent home, and I just couldn't quite get there. I don't know, I realize that it's a rather thin, it is not an excruciatingly wide house, but I wonder if there's room for us to create a little bit more space between this home and the home to the west. Not very much, just I'll be interested in what my fellow commissioners think about that. And I think I'll quit there and hear what my colleagues have to say. I'll bring some more up later.
I just want to respond to a couple of your comments. When I looked at the property to the east on Myrtle, Mr. Goulart's property, it appears it's set back about 4 feet from the fence line already, and what we're proposing is a 3-foot setback from his house, from the fence on the other side. So I had the same concern from it just seems too close, and when we have to consider the safety question, when we grant a variance, does it impact the safety of the neighbors? It's condition 3. That's the one that I think is my concern. I think we'd have to do another variance if we modified that. I'm not sure what we could do there, if the house needs to be a foot thinner or it needs to be moved over a foot. I'm not sure what's allowable, but I had the same concern on that. I wonder if staff would be interested in responding to that question.
That's a tough one. So we appreciate the question. As you know, the 3-foot setback is actually one of the one kind of basic components of the severely substandard lot standards that is actually allowed and does not require a variance, which is why staff had not worked on that part of it with the applicant. It is very close, and I understand that Scott spoke with the applicant today about this concern. We had heard a little bit about it, and I do think it would be fair to give the applicant a chance to talk about any possible design options they've thought about. But it is very tight. We looked at the floor plan for whether or not it could be narrowed. We are also concerned about reducing the exterior side yard setback less than 5 feet. That's the variance where they're requesting 5 feet instead of 10. That the home siting does conform to all the site distance requirements. Some of the things that you heard come up in the public hearing, we've certainly checked those with the city engineer and also our own requirements for them, and site distance and connectivity and sidewalk conditions, et cetera, are all standard and appropriate. So moving it much more is where I would get just a little bit nervous about it, because it's tight and it's about as good as we can do.
Through the chair.
Please.
So if I understood staff's response, the idea would be, and I understand that we want to hear about this from the applicant as well, that the idea is it probably doesn't translate over towards the street. It just becomes a bit thinner, perhaps a foot. I also understood that, and I want to mention this to give the applicant a chance to speak to it if they wish to. I appreciate that the site distance as it's experienced by automobiles that are traveling on Second or Myrtle are going to have, the way the house is set up now, there's going to be adequate view space so that they have time to stop, assuming they're not traveling at excessive speeds. It's been my experience that at these corners, I often see intersections with shrubs that grow quite tall and defeat the purpose of the sight line, or informal fences, or sidewalk sale signs or things like that. But with respect to landscaping, I just wondered if you had a sense, a clarity about maintaining that, and whether that is in your design in a way that would be binding on your successors and heirs. So I'm hoping that we can hear about that as well in response.
Would the applicant like to respond, or the applicant's representative?
So I think I need clarity on the question. I think you talked about the 3.
So I'll clarify your questions. When you're speaking, you need to make sure the green light is fully lit up.
I just
Yep.
have a soft voice,
Yeah.
sorry.
That's okay. So I think there's 2 questions. One is, can you respond to the comment about the site design, the landscape layout, and the sight lines? You're on a corner lot. Is it the intention to keep the lot clear? There's a crosswalk immediately at that intersection on the other side of the street, as well as another crosswalk 1 block over. So this is a heavily trafficked and biked zone. I biked through it 3 times this weekend. Can you respond to the question about the sight lines on the property, and is this something that you'd be amenable to keeping the sight lines clear
So
for the first?
I think per the city request, we moved it forward 5 feet. And so, to be compatible with the existing houses that are at that spot. So, and then the rest of the, the sidewalk and those things is pretty much requirements of Public Works. So, that we've complied to as far as I'm, remembering that's pretty much compatible with the, requirements for, the site.
I think the question is, if I look at your landscaping plan,
Yes.
and if I look at the northeast corner of your design,
Right?
you have no landscaping there that I can see.
So
It's
pretty
clear.
much low, ground cover.
Right,
basically.
it's very,
Right.
it's, so I think, Jimmy, your question was.
I want to be sure we have a condition that keeps it that way. I mean, if someday,
That would be also what they'd want, is to
Yeah.
keep that low-lying landscaping on that corner.
and it's close enough to the curb that there's no parking at proximity to that intersection anyway, I'm guessing I should probably, ask an expert.
Well, and that's what, we had an idea, because if you look at the house next door, there is parking all along there at that same location, but we moved all the parking to the back, and that's kind of the need for the, or that's also to help just the overall setting. It was just a good idea to bring it forward.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear.
But-
I understand that that the parking is gonna be
It's all
once.
behind.
Yeah, I
But
get that. I get
understood
that.
but
I meant
just
the-
explained it.
when
So that
visit-
should all be clear,
Yeah.
the whole 20 feet would be.
I think I'm clear on that triangle of visibility, and, I just want to be sure that staff is comfortable that the conditions attached to the permit, not just during construction, but after, are binding on successor owners in a way that protect that, and are
Basically, you don't
enforceable.
want 6-foot bushes right up on the sidewalk.
You'd be surprised how often that happens.
Right, that would.
So then the other question was with respect to narrowing the width of the home, a foot.
And doing what?
Narrowing the width of the home by a foot
I
to
would
increase
ask
the setback.
not, because the 3 foot doesn't require a variance. It's actually allowed by your codes. So I would hope that would not get, the house is 13 feet wide right now. And, taking out another foot, you're making a 3 foot, 4-inch hallway, 2 feet, 4 inches. There is standard bedroom, widths and space. So if you take another foot out of it, you could be compromising the house and the ability to get, around inside of it. So, I would just hope, unless you're talking about moving over a foot, and, that brings it, it's kind of a give and take. If you're concerned about line of sight and those issues, then if bringing it forward a foot, that would be a Public Works question.
Yeah, I'm clear on that part.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, but I think we'd be okay moving it a foot if we
Yeah,
can
that's
retain-
not what the option I was asking you to talk about, but thank you.
Yeah, so, again, we have some conversation about the 1 foot, through the chair, again, asking staff, since we're proving variances all around, moving it 1 foot further east has what issues attached to it? Please reiterate that, so I can.
We're going to share a quick little demo of the sight lines, just so that everybody understands how they work. We think you could probably move it another foot, but again, I go back to we're kind of right at the maximum envelope of what we could imagine being done on this property. So we're just going to notice this a little bit. Is it 25 feet? Okay, so we look at it, we make a triangle, and we go from the corner, And there's a couple different ways to take the first point. You can see there's a curb ramp here. These are the sidewalks. Typically, for line of sight for the cars, we're going to go 25 feet back from this corner. I personally prefer to make a much more conservative measurement and move in and consider the sight lines for pedestrians. And so I go actually to the corner of the parcel, and that's significantly more conservative. 25 feet it's about there. We know the lot's 21 feet wide, and of course this is not to scale. So what are we? We're about there to go 25 feet back here. This is 20, so 25. If we draw the line, the hypotenuse of that right triangle, we don't have any house in there. And that's what's really the place, the area that needs to be open, and landscaping. Typically the maximum height would be 3 feet, or you could have a tree trunk, but the canopy should be started up higher, so you have 3 feet, 6 feet clear for distance to see from driving a car. So it's very practical, standard zoning code kinds of things, and that's our 25 foot. What I just showed you, though, is stricter than I believe the way our code is written, but it's the way that I would recommend we practice for the sake of some of the concerns that you heard in your public hearing tonight, and just also wanting to acknowledge that we're very much aware of that, and that's why we have the city engineer review plans before they come to you.
So I'm going to ask you another question. Thank you, bringing me back to trigonometry. The 3 foot setback for a substandard house, does that envision having an adjacent property that's also a substandard setback?
Yes, there is provision in the building code that requires a wall-to-wall, minimum wall-to-wall separation.
And what is that minimum wall-to-wall separation?
I believe it's 5 feet. It's either 5 or 6.
Okay.
So.
The chair, for those of us who don't live within a block or two of this location, assuming that we're all comfortable with the orientation shown on the map of where Second and Myrtle is, could you just point to where the crosswalk is that we're talking about? Oh, okay.
This is the existing crosswalk. This is the subject property. So, and this is where the new curb cut would go.
That's in the hatch. Okay, so the concern is that this parcel could be a feeder for traffic coming from the block to which it is adjacent and points southwest.
I mean, the other piece of feedback that I've heard earlier today is the concern about on-street parking, and it's more of a general concern that I heard outside of this meeting when I talked to friends and neighbors about the property. When you don't have covered parking garage, you know, there's always the inclination to have people start parking more and more on the street. Given some of the questions that have been raised, is this something where we could say, well, there's no street parking overnight? Is that something that we could attach to this property, or is that really outside of our purview? Getting a wave off from our attorney.
I don't know if it's in your purview or not, but I think it's very difficult to enforce a condition like that. We would like to share, though, what we've noted is about open parking areas. They're a lot harder to use to store everything that we like to store in our garages, and thus they tend to be left open like a driveway would be to actually provide for on-site parking a little bit more reliably than a garage. So we're pretty confident that there will be at least one, if not both of those stalls open day to day in the long term. which should be consistent with what typical single-family home is providing on site. Most homes we're seeing have at least one car in a driveway.
Okay, thank you.
So, I guess just to perhaps beat a dead horse or not, I too am torn about this being a legal lot. We've kind of heard about that, and the fact that we have to have a significant number of variances in order to build a house. So, I mean, it's kind of a one or the other. And I think if we, in effect, do not approve this, we have a piece of private property that's we're making worthless. And yet we have policies that attempt to develop cheaper, smaller homes that this kind of fits to. So I am torn kind of with what we're required to do here. And that said, you know, I'd hope in the update of our local coastal plan, zoning code, and so on, that we certainly have now a more open mind to figure out how to address this in the future. I've read the old zoning code, and obviously there's an issue here, which is why we're in effect having to approve variances. So I'm just kind of laying this out for something that we certainly need to address much more detail in the future. So, I mean, that's my comment on this, and I will pass comments to my fellow commissioners on this. So, somebody else?
Brian?
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll start off by saying about 10 years ago when I was looking for a house in Half Moon Bay, I actually looked at your house, at the adjacent house, and at that time, this lot was actually used as a part of the neighboring house, and it was sort of known that it was an extra lot, but it was kind of, there was a garden in there. It looked like it would be a nice addition. We actually contemplated, well, if we buy this house, you know, we should try to buy the adjacent lot as well. Didn't go that direction, but that was sort of my first introduction to this corner. I agree with Tim. I fully support the development of infill lots in the city, and I imagine it's a lot easier to design and build a house on a lot that meets all the code, and so kudos to going through the effort to try to design on such a substandard lot. I think the concerns around traffic and sight lines and everything are legitimate. Living in this neighborhood, I know there's a tendency of vehicles to sort of fly around some of these corners that are loosely regulated with stop signs, but those of us who drive on the streets often know that they're not always adhered to, and people flip around, and on my corner I know they whip around pretty quick. So I think the point that was raised about the sidewalk being on one side of the street and the crosswalk for leading over to the alley is a good point. I don't necessarily think that's maybe an issue for this applicant as is for the city, and just looking at traffic calming in general on school routes, safe routes to school, and that type of thing. So whether it's, I know in Alsace-Lorraine there's a couple areas where there's some median signs about school crossing, some of those types of things. You know, maybe this would be an intersection where that might be appropriate. Maybe it's a matter of painting a crossing on the other side, something along those lines. I think that's a fair point. I don't understand the concern about street parking. You know, I think, and if there's, you know, correct me if I'm not getting something there, but you know, I sort of see the street parking on this as somewhat of a traffic calming sort of measure. The cars that are on the street sort of limits the width of the street. People tend to drive a bit slower. They don't whip around as quick when it's such an open shot. So I don't necessarily share that concern right now. I agree that the carport isn't necessarily desirable. So I support the elimination of that. And then regarding the proximity of the house, I mean, it's a substandard lot. It's a tough situation. It's narrow. There's not a lot of, I'd love more available room in my house as well. Any other house, I mean, that's just kind of the nature of, increasing density and in these types of neighborhoods. So comfortable with if it meets all the health and safety codes and the appropriate setbacks there. I support the project.
Yeah, in the parking, it was more just blocking sight lines so kids walking to school. There's no continuous sidewalk going north to south on that street. So no, there's no sidewalk on this side. There's a sidewalk on the west side, and there'll be a proposed one here. But as you go further south, there's no sidewalk on the next block, and please, we'll open it up.
And only as a clarifying point to Mr. Holt's question about, correct me if I'm wrong. So the line sights are one issue, but I think, and the reason it's a traffic study, not a traffic question or answer, is that it has to look at all the things, and the sight lines are one point. The point I was trying to make about the sidewalks is that the requirement from the city is now going to be that a sidewalk is built. With the sidewalk being built, that is now a purposeful funneling of pedestrians to use the sidewalk, opposite of the crosswalk, now creating a different setup. And that's why there needs to be not just a discussion, but a study by experts to look at how is that going to affect. And from my personal viewing experience, the sidewalks aren't used. The street, the middle of the street, is actually used by parents and children to cross, and the children don't even use the yellow crosswalk. They just walk in the middle of the street. So how is that sidewalk that the city is requiring the applicant to put in going to change that? And now, with your fiduciary responsibility, what is that? And so I'm saying, and I appreciate the comments you have brought up, but you are a generalist versus a traffic expert, and what traffic study expertise has been brought in to help you make that decision. So if I could just make sure that I'm giving you all credit where it's due. Okay. So
Thank you.
Clarifying.
I'm going to close public comment. I'm amenable to, this property clearly needs curbs and gutters. There's already drainage issues, water pooling there. The question of a sidewalk is whether or not that makes sense is really for public works, and certainly on the north side of the street, there is no sidewalk on that block on either side. To me, it's really a question of public works should look at it, and I think that if I heard you correctly, some of the questions raised by Officer Gillard have already been addressed through the city from a traffic safety perspective. But my view on this is it absolutely needs curbs and gutters, but the sidewalk, do you want to connect on that existing sidewalk, which is kind of one of many sidewalks we have in the neighborhood, as you know, that lead nowhere, or not, because everybody is walking on the other side of the street, which is why the crosswalk's there. So I'd leave that up to Public Works. I am concerned about the height of the project, and I understand you're trying to get a nice design. The height of the project is mitigated if it was pushed back a foot, but that creates other problems. And there's there's no appetite to make the house a foot narrower. So my concern is we've changed the rules on an existing homeowner along the way. And so it's just a general question of fairness. If you buy a house and you know the lot next to you can be developed, that's one thing, right? You have no expectation of somebody can maximize the development. But if the rules change to a certain extent because the city's changed its policies, this impacts the homeowner who's already there. So I'm a little concerned about either it's a little too close or it's a little too high. I'd like to see it pushed back a foot, but I don't. That's a question that, again, the city has qualified experts to determine if it's safe, if it blocks view lines. I'd ask my fellow commissioners if they were amenable to give the city discretion to move the property a foot further, with Public Works approval.
Through the chair. Yeah. So I just wanted to get clarity. I understood that I appreciate that the applicant was certainly reluctant to narrow the house by a foot. With respect to health and safety concerns, I wasn't clear on whether the issue was that would impose a health and safety restriction for moving around inside the house. I didn't think that. I didn't think it was. Or whether it was that as long as there was a total of, I think Scott said 5 feet, 5 or 6 feet between the homes, that that somehow it wouldn't rise. Is that the threshold before which it rises to the concern of being a health and safety issue, or am I overreading what that means?
It's a building code and fire safety requirement, so.
So it's necessary but not sufficient.
Minimum space between buildings, so.
It's 6 feet. It also applies on the same property as well. So if you had a house and a detached garage, you'd require the same spacing on the property. So it's a code that goes all the way around.
Right. Okay, so I'll just make one last pitch and say this cries out for a pronto revision of the substandard, severely substandard lot ordinance. I would hate for it to wait for an LCP update. How long would it take staff to draft something for us to consider? Is there any chance it could be presented as part of the ADU ordinance that's coming up?
Well, we've actually thought about that because of your study session a few weeks ago where we looked at this project as well as the duplex. So we've also received some additional applications on substandard lots, and we are struggling to make parking fit on those as well. They are not corner lots, and thus we would like to continue to get some more input. We do think it is a compatible type of zoning consideration to the ADU types of codes, and it follows the same policy guidance as the housing element for ADU code.
I, for one, would like to see an effort to, I realize that that's not the question that's been noticed today, so, but I would invite the commissioners to weigh in as part of the process to decide whether this is something that they would like to see integrated into the ADU ordinance, because this is not the last time we will see it, and a process that doesn't involve variances that can address what Commissioner Chair Hernandez said was the sort of changing of the rules. It would be a way to address that in a way that I think might provide some additional mutual shared respect among all of the involved parties.
Point of order, are we allowed, we're kind of going off on a tangent. I want to make sure.
Yeah, I'm not asking for a vote of any kind on this.
Yeah, I take that as just a comment on future policy issues that might want to be considered, and we could add that to an agenda through our normal process at a later time.
I want to make sure we're not crossing the line.
Are we ready for a motion, by the way?
I guess you guys might be. I'm a little concerned given there's some things that may be changing in the near term. Once we approve this project, which has 2 variances, it's going to get built out as is. And my concern would be, I think I might be in the minority here, but I'd be more interested in continuing until we address some of these other questions. But I think, again, I'm in the minority here. So if you guys want to make a motion, that's fine.
All right, well, let's try it. Move that we approve PDP 15096, an application for a coastal development permit, architectural review, street facing side yard setback variance, front yard setback variance, and parking exception to allow the construction of a new 1,010 square foot single family residence, 2714 square foot site, 390 Myrtle Street, based on facts and findings and evidence contained in Exhibit A of the draft resolution, subject to the conditions of approval. And Exhibit B, I want to add, I agree that the carport should be removed, number 1. And number 2, that if there is an option to move the house 1 foot further east, that I think that should be explored by the city and the planning department.
Second, for purposes of discussion. So would the maker...
Mentioned a deed restriction on development. I mean, on the area where the parking to prevent any structure from being added.
Correct.
It's not in the current conditions of approval.
He's the motion maker.
I will accept that.
Okay.
So, given staff's question with respect to their conservatism with respect to the line of sight issue, is there any interest from the maker of the motion to shift to giving staff the latitude to narrow the structure by a foot?
I don't think that is viable given the size of the house. I think that would be an extreme hardship, so I would not want to personally include that in there.
I understand.
You want to repeat that?
So
All
what
right. So we do need to share one correction for the record and then offer a couple thoughts in the vein of your motion and discussion that you've held. First of all, we cited a CEQA exemption in your resolution, and we cited the wrong one. We cited 15301, and we should have cited 15303, which exempts single-family homes. And we apologize for that and appreciate our city attorney here helping us with that. We would like to draw your attention to Exhibit B, page 10 and page 11 of this is part of the resolution. This is the conditions of approval. Consider Exhibit B, Condition 6. It's at the top of page 10 regarding landscape maintenance. This is a place where you could provide additional language about the height of landscaping, which came up in our discussion, and we would just suggest that you might want to, if you're going to proceed, you might want to capture your intent in that condition that we believe you had in your discussion. We don't want to presuppose that, but we just want to catch that. And then condition number 11 on page 11 for street frontage improvements. We're hearing comments and discussion about discretion for the city engineer and public works with regards to the sidewalks. And what we would suggest doing is you could modify that condition to describe that, but I would strongly encourage you to include, if sidewalks were not to be provided, which we could actually consider some very nice designs without sidewalks, but we would still want a deferred agreement so that in the event of some kind of future public works improvement on 2nd Avenue or on Myrtle, you haven't foreclosed from having that contribution in that area. So there's a lot of ways to make Condition 11 more flexible along the lines of what you're talking about, and we'd encourage you to do that in that area. Thanks.
So for purposes of, so continuing the discussion about what the motion is, I wonder if the maker is fine with implementing a change to Condition 6 on page 10. I guess this is A6 of the conditions, to reflect that the landscaping in the sightline area will be kept clear based on the trigonometry lesson we got earlier tonight.
So, I thought that was evident, but it's not that the sight lines have to be kept clear. Okay, so I will accept that addition to my motion.
Very nice. And then with respect to street improvements, personally, I'm fine with the motion the way it stands.
Which means we need a second, right?
I'm still seconded. I seconded.
You had indicated the discretion to city staff of considering moving the lot 1 foot to the
East. I did that, right.
Yeah, I would withdraw my second if that stands in the motion.
Okay.
I think it's, I worry about that.
Even if it was subject to Public Works approval, review, etc.
You know, I think I appreciate the intention of creating that additional space in between the homes. That's why I proposed the narrowing, so I'm completely with you. But I do worry about the discretion to narrow the line of sight. To me, that's a superior concern.
Which gives me the choice to leave it or remove it. I guess I will remove it, so take that discretion off the motion
Second stands.
to moving it 1 foot east. Please take that off my motion.
Can we please confirm the motion?
Okay, all right. Motion is as written with the following additions. No carport.
Landscaping.
Also, the landscaping issue in the front.
A6, that was.
What else did we add? On the parking area, right? So that's the third one. No.
Thank you.
And may I just assume, and could you amend it also to correct the typo in the CEQA exemption?
Right.
Agreed.
Right. Changing the CEQA. All right. So that's my motion.
All right, sorry, can we get a roll call vote?
Commissioner DeMond,
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin,
Yes.
Evans is absent, Vice Chair Holt,
Yes.
and Chair Hernandez.
No. The motion passes 3-1.
Through the
Okay.
chair, I wonder if we could have a 5-minute
Yep.
recess.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
right, let's get started. So the next item on, so I'm opening up the Planning Commission meeting again. Next item on the agenda is 300 Main Street. Scott, are you driving on this one?
Yes, that's right, Mr. Chair. Thank you, and thanks again, Planning Commissioners. So this, as mentioned, this project is at 300 Main Street. Shown in green here, it's along the west side of Main Street, just south of the Main Street Bridge. Along in Pilarcitos Creek runs along the north side of the property. Note this, since, due to the creek, the site is within the appeals jurisdiction for the California Coastal Commission. So the final decision could get appealed to the Coastal Commission. The notice was, or this item was duly noticed in the newspaper. The site was posted. Mailings were sent out to all the neighbors. The permits requested include coastal development permit, use permit for residential within the CD zoning district, architectural review, and a parking exception. The project includes converting the existing 11 second-story bed and breakfast rooms at the north building of the Zavala House into 6 individual apartments. Noted in the red box there to give you an idea as to where the building's located. The only exterior change associated with this project is the installation of an elevator and the elevator enclosure, and I've added a little small box on the sort of the lower left-hand corner there to indicate that. They would also install one additional, a new van accessible ADA parking stall, as well as short-term and long-term bicycle parking. Here's a copy of the site plan showing the existing parking in the building and a little clearer view of the elevator enclosure and ADA parking stall. Here's the existing floor plan that shows the bed and breakfast rooms. And then here's the proposed site floor plan that includes the 6 new apartments. And essentially what would take place is taking 2 of the bed and breakfast rooms, opening them up and creating an apartment out of the 2 and converting one of the bathrooms to a kitchen. This is the rear or west elevation. A little arrow shows the new elevator enclosure. And then this is the south or the side elevation. So one of the key things that the Planning Commission needs to consider is the use conformance with the zoning district and compatibility with the surrounding downtown area. Residential development is a conditionally permitted use in the downtown, and generally residential uses are to be sited on the second floor. We certainly have policy associated with that, identifying the commercial uses on the ground floor for mixed use, and that includes in their downtown specific plan, which would allow for downtown vibrancy, more walking and contributing to the overall vitality of the downtown area. As mentioned in the previous project, our certified housing element also has policy to encourage smaller, more affordable units, and this would certainly fit into that. In regard to the parking exception, so they've on the second page of the plan set, it does have identify the existing parking that's provided on the site in relation to the existing uses, and essentially what would be required is one additional off-street parking space that they're shy, as well as eliminating the garage parking for the residential.
For the record, the one is one more space in nonconformance than what it currently has. The total nonconformance would be 5 spaces. The existing condition is nonconforming with regards to the city's parking ordinance by 4 spaces. So we just wanted you to see different ways of looking at it. It's in the table presented with the 5 spaces.
So this is a unique site, unique configuration. We've got the creek that runs along the north side. There's certainly a unique circumstance that allows us to make the findings for the requested parking exception. Additionally, the peak parking demand for the commercial uses on the lower floor fit nicely with the proposed residential uses on the second floor. Normally, folks working in the daytime will go elsewhere, and then at night the parking would be available that's wouldn't necessarily be used for the commercial uses on the ground floor. We have there is a condition of approval that would require 6 of the parking spaces to be signed and designated for the residential uses. And then a few notes about, some questions came up about transit occupancy tax. And keep in mind that this is really not a land use concern at this point. It's certainly, good information and, something to consider. We did do a little research leading up to this meeting, and it turns out that the current occupancy rate for hotel rooms, bed and breakfasts within Half Moon Bay last year were about at 72%, which is considered a fairly high percentage of, fairly healthy. And so for the Zabala House, we would be eliminating 11 rooms, but keep in mind that we are going to have here shortly 46 additional rooms coming online for the Best Western on the south side of town. And then the Planning Commission is reviewing the short-term rental ordinance that could provide some additional opportunity for transit occupancy. Transient occupancy. Now, now Jill's going to kind of talk about the water connections because this is a critical part of this project as well.
So this is a very interesting, most direct change of use that I'm aware of from staff's research and talking to the Water District staff, from a priority use with respect to the coastal acts consideration for visitors serving commercial, which is what lodging is, to a non-priority use, which is what the residential use is. And it's a pretty challenging piece of code to work through, and we wanted you to be aware that this was part of the considerations of this application. Although we believe that existing policy would cover this particular transfer in that there is only one water connection involved, and the onus is on us to conform with that municipal code section that's cited there, which we need to only allow transfers of water from priority to non-priority in the event that we can demonstrate that we have reserved enough priority water for supporting the land use plan build out, in that it's only one connection, and with what I can see going on with the land use plan build out on the books now and where we're going, I'm pretty comfortable with that. That said, we still just really would like to get some input about it, and we do believe this is going to come through on your local coastal program, and it is not something that we really have a process for. We've spent some time with our colleagues down at the Water District, and A few pieces of note that I wanted to share with you, just so you know, because we anticipate the questions. One is the Water District does not, at this point in time, have a method for taking the priority connection back in. So if the applicant was required to purchase a non-priority connection for this use, what that means is all the piping, everything that they have connected to the main stays right where it is, and it's just a matter of accounting that it would be a non-priority connection. The priority connection would just sit there attributed to the property and be unused at this point in time. So that's a concern. We actually are aware that there are about 200 priority connections. You heard Charles Lester present about this. There's about 200 priority connections available right now for Half Moon Bay and the unincorporated Mid-Coast. On top of that, I think it's on the order of 40 that were purchased and never installed. And we're not really sure how to bring those back into your inventory. So that's another really interesting caveat about it. So I'm just taking this little timeout and note on this because this brought up all kinds of water questions that we have, and we would love to get a little bit of your input about this, of course, tonight. Your focus is on the project, but we did put this in the staff report, and you're free to discuss it. And I'm happy to answer other questions about it. We've set up the project to allow you to consider approving it with a condition for City Council to continue and conclude on this policy discussion for this particular case, or possibly to give us some guidance for work that we'll be doing on local coastal program policy.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Scott, are you finished?
Yeah, just to conclude, we suggest the Planning Commission ask any clarifying questions, take public comment. The applicant and applicant's representative are here to answer any questions and present on the project and provide any Planning Commission discussion. Additionally, Commissioner Evans did provide some comments on this particular project, and I believe a copy has been provided to all of you to review. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
For the record, I've read Commissioner Evans' comments, so I think we all have a copy of those. Thank you for the staff report and the presentation. It's very clear, very straightforward. Point of clarification, it's really staff's position that this whole question of priority versus non-priority use of water is really a policy decision that needs to be determined by council. It's not something that we really should be weighing in on, but you'd like our opinion. But the direction is council needs to decide the policy. Okay, so just wanted to clarify that.
I wanted to be sure I caught that. So I understand that we don't make the call, it's a council call, but they're inviting our opinion on it. So they are asking us to weigh in.
They are asking our opinion, but the decision on the priority versus non-priority is
I understand.
City
Thank you.
Council decision. Okay. Any other clarifying questions?
Yeah, just one. So back on it was the first or second slide, there was a picture of the lot, and I noticed that the existing development, including the structure and parking, looks like it abuts right up to the riparian area. So we already have a use inside the buffer, and we go right up to the riparian corridor. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, but no construction would be, the only construction within the parking lot would be the new lift on the south side.
No, I get that. I just noticed that the parking exceptions made a reference to the infeasibility of working in the riparian, adding parking in the riparian corridor. And I just wanted to be sure I understood how parking had worked so far.
Correct. We wouldn't allow new garages to be constructed within the riparian buffer.
Thanks.
I have no questions.
Okay, the applicant is here along with his architect, Ed Love. Would you like to, I'm going to open up for public comment if you guys would like to address the commission. Please make sure the green light is on as always once you've cleared your throat.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. Pretty straightforward project, one we think is really beneficial for downtown to get people downtown to patronize the stores and the restaurants, permanent people rather than transients that are moving in and out. There's smaller rental units. There's a great scarcity of these in Half Moon Bay and the coast. Young couples, singles. Rents are so high in the few rentals that are available that it really takes a lot of people. They're not able to be here. So, and Scott mentioned the split use for the parking, and that really works very, very well because you have people coming in, shopkeepers and customers during the day, and then the residents of the 6 units would be parking there in the evenings. So that's a very efficient use of the existing parking. I don't have much to add to it. I'll answer any questions that you might have about the conversion.
So there was, the staff report, good evening, Ed, nice to see you. So in the staff report, there was a reference to a proposal to perhaps enhance the value of the parking that would be available to the public when it was available by making some electric vehicle available in those spots. Has the applicant got a position about that? Are they open to that, receptive to that?
You mean a charging station, perhaps?
Correct.
It's certainly possible that they might consider that, of course. I think probably in the future, everybody's going to have that.
Yeah, it struck me that you might even think you'd sort of be ahead of the curve on this.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Scott's done his usual exceptional job with the staff report. So if there's no other questions, we'll call it an early evening. Okay.
I'm Eugene Thorset. I live at 326 Parisma Street, which is more or less adjacent to this property at the end of this street. In principle, I'm not opposed to this particular conversion, but I do have some questions. There's going to be 6 units, 12 bedrooms, right? Six. Only they're 1-bedroom apartments? My mistake. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so that covers my main concern, because if you had 12 bedrooms, you could count on 24 cars practically. That's the way it goes. I mean, let's be realistic. Parking during the daytime, there are people who live on the street, who park cars in the lot all day long. I'm sure you're aware of this. Well, they're not enforced. And so the whole idea of some of the parking being available and all of this is not quite clear. My main question centered around the number of bedrooms, and also since these are 1-bedroom apartments, there is the possibility that the small families with kids might decide to rent these. There isn't any place for children there, so it's basically an adults kind of place. There's no place for kids to play, if there are any, and so it's not really going to be appealing to families, which of course may keep them out anyway. But I think that's something that needs to be concerned. I mean, low rent apartments, people starting families may decide that they can start out there, and there's really nowhere for them to go. It's a downtown situation. It's not amenable to a family kind of place. Also, what about people who live there and they have boats or RVs or whatever? Now, where are they going to park? I don't know if there's a solution to that. People accumulate stuff. There's no storage area in this particular place. So, I mean, the example is the house next to us, which was once a business, and then was surreptitiously coded to basically a rooming house, which has 6 or 7 cars, 4 of them which park in your lot. I got the gate across the end of the street. Okay. Hey, the mayor put it there. I didn't put it there. The famous Mel Mello.
We
Okay. Anyway.
wrap up.
You know, you have this situation where cars just seem to accumulate, and these rental units get split up and split up. More and more people live in them because of the high rents, and so I'm concerned that there may well be for lack of a better word, a tenement situation that comes to play here. But anyway, my main concern has been corrected, and that was the number of bedrooms. So that's fixed. But there are other questions about stuff people accumulate, boats, RVs, and all that kind of stuff. Where are they going to go? And the dedicated parking, will that be dedicated all day long? There's 6 spaces or something that are supposed to be dedicated. Will they be all day? Will they be permanently dedicated, so there'll be no parking at any time except for residents?
We'll take those. So the point here is for you to raise your questions, and then we'll.
Okay. So I think at this point I'll just stop, but that's most of what I wanted.
Thank you, sir. Given all the members of the public who are here have spoken, I'm going to close public comment. Any redirect back over to the Planning Commission. What do you guys think?
Kudos to the change out. I mean, I'm all for having a downtown that has a combination of residential, commercial, and other. And I think even though this hotel building wasn't designed for residences, I think the changeover certainly is viable. I mean, it's not perfect. I don't think it'll attract everybody. I mean, it's small enough that it'll just attract a certain group. I think the parking issue, I think that's been discussed, and the fact that we were short before, in fact, I think the comment that this might result in lower demand than before, I think I agree with that. So all in all, to me, that's positive. And you know, at this point, since we're really not changing footprint, I'm certainly positive that this is a good project going forward.
Sure. So I'd like to thank the applicant and the applicant's architect and the public speaker who expressed concerns. That was a great, compact and helpful set of issues, and I commend you. I have some questions about the way the mechanics of the parking would work. Not too long ago, I think it was 719, we approved a development where the parking was shared, and there was some time that it was available for the owner of, the tenant or owner who lived in the building, and then other times that it was available for the public. I don't remember whether that was just a proposal before they did the lot merger or whether we actually imposed that condition, but you may recall it. And I'm just wondering if we know how that's working out.
We imposed a condition.
Okay, thank you. Do we know how that's working out?
It's not been, the new
that's why.
project hasn't been built yet.
Right. It seems to be working. Right.
Awesome.
No problems at all.
That EV station's killer too.
Right. So, yeah, it's a good point. Time flies when you're having fun. So, it seems to me that maybe staff, you can elaborate on how what would be the mechanics of making sure that those parking spaces are actually available and not consumed by the applicants, the tenants in the building or by their stuff. Do you have a take on that? Are there particular hours? This is sort of where the rubber meets the road in terms of sharing.
So the intent was that the 6 parking spaces would be signed and dedicated to the one for each of the new residential units all the time. If the Planning Commission isn't comfortable with that, you're welcome to modify that condition or, maybe have the time just the dedicated time for residential in the evening hours or, it's certainly in the purview of the Planning Commission to modify that condition.
Let me clarify my question. I was actually pivoting in the other direction, which is is there something in the project design that ensure that the public would be able to have access to some of the parking when the private citizens who rent the units are not in it?
The condition of approval could be modified to require, different signage indicating so.
And with respect to the concern of storage, the conditions could certainly prohibit the use of the parking spaces for trailers. I'm assuming that the applicant and is amenable to this idea. I suppose if they wanted to occupy their one parking space with trailer, would you like that, or would you say, no, this is all about cars? Okay, so we want to get clarity, let the record show that we got a negative head shake from staff.
We want to note that outside storage is not a
Permitted use.
Allowed outright downtown, so it just wouldn't be something that we could have there anyway.
Okay, and is there an opportunity for us to have a monitoring program to see how this works? Okay, I heard staff the applicant was amenable, the applicant's architect, and I'm wondering if the applicant also was amenable to adding charging stations to add value to the parking that was available. I'm sorry. No, forgive me. The question was addressed to Ed earlier, and he thought it might be. So let me. I don't want to address the public with this is through the chair question.
Yeah, I would just. I think it's an interesting question that's been raised of. It's not something you've proposed in your project, and I don't think it's
Thank you.
well, there you go.
Thank you. So, okay, thank you very much. Or somebody plugs into the adjacent Tesla.
Tim Pond will run his extension cord over to your house.
Right.
Across Highway 1.
So the remaining question that I wanted to talk about was the mechanics of the water connections, because we've been asked for a weigh-in on that. And our last application took us to trigonometry. This project takes us to quantum mechanics. What we have is.
You going to talk about Schrodinger's cat now?
Well, if you think of Schrodinger's cat as being a viable commercial use versus a residential use, that's not a bad analogy. On an individual basis, when we look at any particular unit in the downtown, across the specific plan area, I guess in the limiting case, any individual unit one day may be a commercial visitor serving, which requires commercial visitor serving water connection, which would be a priority water connection. And then the next day or the next year or 10 years later, it's a non-priority application, because that's the way the respiration of business evolves downtown for whatever reason. And one of the challenges when I thought about the water connection problem is that we're managing it on each quantum particle in the quantum physics metaphor. And what we should be doing is thinking about what is needed across downtown. in a sort of a more stochastic, in sort of a more of a statistical way. That we have, you know, on a block, you know, we can count the number of connections, and we can see how many of them are commercial serving visitors, you know, priority use kind of uses, and how many are not. And while on an individual, you know, structure basis, that's going to flip from 0 to 1, or in this case 0 to a half, since the bottom units, as I understand it, are in the building are remaining commercial visitor serving. This project is about the upper units. I'm guessing that if you average those kind of changes across the block, they actually are more stable. And it may be that the advice to the city council for staff to think about this is having something equivalent to a beneficial assessment district model for maintaining the required water connections. Just as I think the chair, I don't remember, I think it was you who raised the TOT issue. Another similar issue that it may not be immediately germane to the permit question we have here, but is relevant to the planning, is that I believe this is part of a beneficial assessment district for downtown improvement. And I don't know whether that changes. You know, if that's primarily focused at increasing the return on business revenue, you know, maybe the benefit accrues to residences as well. So like TOT, a little bit afield from the permit that's being talked about here. But I do think that the water connection is quite germane, and you know, it would buffer the group from having to dramatically shift its you know, what kind of permit it has, and reduce their stress levels. So that's, I think, a way to think about water. I apologize for the quantum shock. I really didn't mean to think of it that way. Just the idea that you'd have this aggregate understanding and it would shift from time to time. I certainly support the idea. I could enthusiastically support the parking exception in light of the applicant's interest in providing for what is a deeply underserved resource for some of our visitors who would like to come to town if only they could get a reliable plug-in. So a nice level 2 charger would make a huge difference in terms of the accessibility in that area. And I commend you. Thank you. Those are my comments.
The project, I mean, it in itself, you're operating within the shell of the existing building. I don't see any issues with the conversion. The elevator will be needed. The impact seems like it's probably less intense in many respects overall, and so I don't have any issues with the exception on the parking. I would like to see the addition of 1 or more charging stations to the location. Especially if we're taking the argument that moving a priority water use to, I mean, this is a non-priority use, but if we don't have an accounting vehicle right now within the water district to move them from bucket A to bucket B. So if we're going to city council, I'd say there's an argument to be made that, 1, it makes the downtown more sustainable, which I think is alluded to in the staff report, but adding something like a charging station also adds to the visitor serving, so there's an overall public good. So I'm generally supportive of the project, and I'm a little, I know city council, if you're looking for feedback, I think Jimmy's concept of we need to make sure that the overall downtown area is sustainable, and if, you know, it's difficult to run a business if you don't have that center of that sort of concentration of people who are there. I think there's a logical argument to be made that you're going to probably bring more people in. Certainly, that's reasonable. I do think, you know, Yeah, I think the interesting questions are raised about amenities if you do have a family there. There's a new passive park that's being added across the street, so hopefully that addresses that. And there's an arcade that I spend a lot of time with my daughter at. Now it's in your building, so I'm generally supportive.
Through the chair, and then there's Carter Park.
What's that? And
Carter
there's
Park.
Carter Park as well. Yeah, so there are facilities that are accessible. So I don't have any other comments or questions. Do you want to get a motion?
Well, I'd echo the comments that have been said. I mean, my one thought is, I guess not looking towards the future, but maybe more towards looking towards the past. I agree and support the electric vehicle charging stations, but I also note there's only one bike locker proposed, or 2 bike lockers? So 2, yeah. So, you know, I don't know if there's a need to expand that, or if we could, or if there's space to, and don't necessarily need that to be part of the consideration here, but I just know, you know, I mean, this site is right across the street from a Samtrans bus stop, you know, in terms of transit accessibility, biking, you know, all that sort of thing. I think, you know, the parking for visitor serving definitely important, but my Pollyannish point of view would be, you know, maybe people who live here wouldn't own a car at all, and they'd be able to bike and, you know, get on the bus. So would like to make sure that there's definitely adequate, you know, storage for those types of facilities. I don't know that necessarily needs to be a part of our approval or our motion, and, you know, hopefully there's a time where demand just dictates that.
Perhaps the applicant can answer this question. I think you don't have bike lockers, but you already have bike racks on the property today. Okay, yeah. There's this. Okay.
Yeah, which doesn't necessarily get to the point, though. Yeah, but we don't necessarily want residents here utilizing bike racks that should be accessible to visitors and to the public.
So you're thinking of bike lockers.
Yeah, exactly.
So you think we should add more bike lockers to the property?
Maybe, do you think, I appreciate that you're being very gentle, through the chair.
Yep, please.
That you're being very gentle about proposing this as a nexus for this particular project. Is this something that could come up if we were to create a more walkable Main Street and widen the sidewalks enough to make this work, or do you feel like this needs to be part of a?
I wouldn't want to see bike lockers on the sidewalks.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of incorporated, and you can see where it is in the back of the building here. There's two bike lockers here, sort of at the rear. 6 units, you had 6 bike lockers. Theoretically, everybody who lived there could have access to store a bike in a separated space that's contained and outside of the public right-of-way.
I misunderstood. So you're proposing these would be for the use of the residents?
Adding 4 more bike lockers to the 2 that are proposed.
I see. I wonder how the applicant feels about that.
I just think it's more likely that folks who might be living in these small apartments may own a bicycle rather than an electric vehicle.
I'm glad that I asked him to speak.
I actually opened it up to the applicant. Would you be amenable to adding 4 bike? I guess the point is, since there's a variance for parking that's being requested, as a way to address the variance, would you be open to adding 4 more bike lockers to the project?
Through the chair,
Yep.
can you point that, can perhaps Scott or somebody point out on that diagram where the bike lockers, since I can't read that, fine. So that is, right now, sufficient for 2 bike lockers? Okay.
Maybe not a condition of approval, but a recommendation can be made to add additional bike lockers. If you could work with city staff. I think the concern is that it may make it a more livable space for the residents if we have bike lockers, and probably add to the value, so, okay. All right, so, based on that, can I get a motion?
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
And just to get clarity from my colleagues with respect to, I appreciate the interest in the quantum mechanics craziness. That's something to refer to the city council. Are we, right now, is there, maybe I didn't read this carefully. I see the condition that requires CCWD to certify that there's adequate water. Is there a condition right now that asks for council to make a final approval? Can you remind me where it is, please? I read this pretty late last night.
So it's condition B1. Policy guidance related to this use of priority water connections for new non-priority uses shall be requested from the city council. Any changes requested by the city council related to water connections shall be implemented. And this is prior to the issuance of a building permit.
All right. And I'm assuming that the CEQA, the referenced CEQA document is right. We've got the right sections.
I confirm that one, yes.
Excellent. Okay, you have a few minutes. So I move the resolution next in order with the change to the findings for the parking exception to reflect that the applicant is agreeing to provide 2 EV chargers. And I request that staff investigate the possibility, but not the obligation, to install additional bike lockers. And with the condition B1 that the applicant provided, that Scott read us, I don't think we need an additional condition to provide the water. But you have the information you need to go back to the council without that being incorporated into the motion, is that right? Or do you want a separate motion about that? You're clear. Okay, that's the motion.
So, actually, though, I think the applicant agreed to 1 EV charger.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I believe it was 1.
Okay,
so,
1
so
is
I
fine.
think- okay.
1
so,
is fine. I thought it was 2. My mistake.
So just, yeah.
It's the wave of the future. You'll be glad you did it.
But, yeah, so the resolution would be to add 1 EV charging station and then have a recommendation to examine adding additional bike lockers.
Right.
Okay.
It's a encouragement.
It's second.
Can I get a roll call vote?
Commissioner Devon,
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin.
Yes.
Absent is Commissioner Evans, Vice Chair Holt,
Yes.
and Chair Hernandez.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for fixing that.
Okay, motion passes 4-0. Okay, thank you. And on a side note, I noticed your project on Church and Kelly is near, I believe that was your project on Church and Kelly is near completion? At love? That's not his? Okay. Yeah, oh, that's Cameron Jeff's, that's not yours. That's not yours. All right, never mind. Moving on. So, Jill, do you have anything for us?
Absolutely. First of all, we have happy birthday, Chair. And couple little treats. So on the occasion of your birthday, we'll present an agenda forecast. So April 27th, we may actually have the draft
Thank you.
ADU ordinance ready for you. That may not be able to include some of those thoughts we've been working on at the staff level and that we heard tonight regarding small lot development, substandard lot development. So we'll see if we can catch that into it or not. We'll take a look at that. In May, we would expect you to see Jenna Lane come back, and you'll also see the annual review of the capital improvement program before it goes through budget approval. Are we all riveted? Okay.
Gentlemen, I ask you
Fine.
to turn down the volume just a little bit. Thanks.
You're fine. Tomorrow, we have two administrative director decisions. One's a deck at 359 Filbert. The other is an ADU at 456 Spruce. They both fully conform to every component of the LCP, and thus they can be reviewed in that manner. They've been noticed. Coming up with City Council that we think would be of interest to you, quite specifically next Tuesday, you've been invited to attend a joint session with City Council at 5:00 p.m. for the AB 1234 ethics training that I believe the City Attorney Catherine Engberg will be presenting, and we'd encourage you to pick up that training at that session so you can be with your council and also have that tuned and focused to your role here and not be such a general course that your backup position is to take an online class. So
What was that date again? I'm sorry.
we are looking at a week from today. I hope you got the email heads up. Okay.
Is that required?
It's a required training. If you can't make this session, we'll give you another option.
Okay, all right.
Okay. There's some good classes. We just thought this would be especially helpful. Also on April 17th at the regular City Council meeting, Council will hear the appeal of the 525 Railroad Avenue project that you had seen recently. On May 1st, Council will hold a retreat, and I'm still getting word of what those hours for that will be. They will not have a regular meeting. On May 15th, we're hoping to bring Council an award of contract for CEQA consulting services for both the Parks Master Plan and the Bike Ped Master Plan. That's sort of the last kind of proving ground for those two plans, to have them run through a CEQA analysis, and you will see that come back to you with that CEQA coverage. We're out right now with an RFP for an EIR consultant for the Surf Dunes Beach PUD, so you may be hearing about that. The next step for us after selecting a consultant will be to bring that award of contract to City Council. We'll keep you posted. We're receiving public comments on that item, even though it's not really an application yet and it's not out for public comment. We are taking them in, we're keeping track of them, and we'll keep you apprised of those. We are also expecting Metzger final map to be a City Council item within the next month or two. LCP update, we have made significant progress on the habitat and species maps, and we are working through them with the subcommittee. Draft chapters will be going to the subcommittee of the document, and we will try to firm up the Planning Commission's schedule for what you're going to be seeing as a whole within the next few weeks. I'm not ready to do that yet. We need to have a little more time with the subcommittee to work on that. We had a few things underway and running through the public workshop that we thought would really be good for you to know about, because you probably get asked about them. First up, two things that are happening now. The library project remains on schedule for a summer opening. A project that will start in the next couple of weeks is a Main Street crosswalk project. There are 5 crosswalks involved. One is a high visibility crosswalk on Main Street at the high school. The second one is at Stone Pine. The third one is at La Petite Baline. The fourth one is at Poplar and Main. And the fifth is at Arnold Way in Maine.
Yay.
That's we agree. Also underway in the engineering planning process is Highway 1 South. They're making significant progress on the project that you approved in the design details with Caltrans. Behind that, being prepared for U2C for a coastal development permit as well as CEQA review is the Highway 1 North project and the Main Street Bridge, which just got refunded. So that will be moving along to your purview, so that'll be good to hear. And then a couple more things that are in the planning process, so not close to design, but we think will be really important for you to know about and will involve the community. The Poplar Complete Streets project and also what we have dubbed the Poplar Gateways plan, which is really for the city's Poplar Beach area, including the parking lot, the coastal trail, the beach access point, and there's additional access ways through that area. The area has already been sector walked by Huffman Broadway Group for the biological resource assessment. An award of contract has already been given to NCE Engineering Consultants with a landscape architect sub, so it's a really dynamic team. I think we'll have the gateways and the Complete Streets project, obviously they are going to connect to each other. So we're looking at how best to conduct community engagement. We've identified a few especially interested community members to help us start out with our community engagement, and we'll keep you in the loop on that as we get going. These are high visibility, important, high value added projects to Half Moon Bay. We're really excited that they're moving ahead.
I had just on the Poplar Complete Streets, a note of alarm has been raised by people with the use of the term complete streets. In engineering parlance, that means curbs, gutters, widen streets, put in sidewalks. And so I know in previous discussions that hasn't been the intent. I just wanted to clarify.
So I think we are working our way through dispelling that requirement. We're looking at some design opportunities that you saw in the bike ped design guidelines that included green street components, drainage features, no curb walkways, traffic calming, use of existing mature landscaping, addition of new mature landscape types of features like cypress trees and things like that to be compatible with, in particular, the Highway 1 to the coastal trail span of Poplar. We think there's going to, I could talk about this for a really long time, so I'll stop.
As could I. The concern is simply and maybe it's just changing the name or consider changing the name of.
If we have a grant for Complete Streets, so we're a little bit stuck with that, but we'll think about what we can do there. So
okay,
thank you for that
just
feedback.
A concern
yep.
The second one is, am I conflicted out on that project? Because that
I
literally
don't know.
goes down my.
We'll take a look. We'll take a look. There's it's more than just your frontage and what's in the 500 feet. Yeah.
I'm required to do whatever the city asks. It's a condition of the approval on my project. Okay, that was the only question I had.
Okay.
Through the chair, there was, and maybe I missed it when I was out for 1 week, but I saw public statements about the replacement of the bridge over Frenchman's Creek. Is that worthy of conversation, or has that come up at a previous meeting?
I have not heard from State Parks in a little while, so I'm not up to date.
Okay, so yeah, Sweetwood, right.
Yes.
I do that all the time. So yeah, the story I heard from, the cub reporter of Half Moon Bay on trails, a shout out to you, Walter Sensing, is that we're moving forward, they're moving forward with replacements of the Frenchman's Creek, the bridge over Frenchman's Creek for pedestrians at Sweetwood. So I thought that was worth mentioning. Hope it's true.
Okay, great. Any planning commission or communications?
Yeah, I just want to point out, I do not read blogs and gossip, but some of my friends do. And next door, this past 2 weeks has been alive with comments on the Hyatt project and calling out certain names that I won't mention here. But I just want to make sure that in the future that we insist on decorum the audience, and I think that's something that's important. And also take note of people who actually cite breaking laws, like gathering up red-legged frogs and putting it on other properties and things like that. I just wanted to make sure that our council, the planning commissioners and everybody else was aware of these kind of things. And I hope they're just venting in blogs, but again, I just wanted to make people aware of that because other people are making me aware of that.
You have written evidence of some fool threatening to put red-legged frogs on a property. Awesome. I suggest you provide that to our attorney. Thanks. Any others? Okay.
Just mention, I guess, on a maybe a happier note, I attended a meeting today with the Federal Highway Administration and Caltrans talking about nature-based solutions for coastal highway resiliency, and Half Moon Bay came up quite a bit. Devil's Slide was talked about as sort of a great example of sort of retreat, and was sort of interesting to hear how Caltrans kind of framed that project versus, sort of the, they sort of said, we made the choice to move inland and that. But we did get in the conversation at Surfers Beach and some of the other areas and things are going on. So anyways, interesting conversation, not necessarily, a lot of substantive results that came out for Half Moon Bay, but people are definitely aware. So I found that encouraging.
So for those who might be watching that don't know, I think that it was 75% of the voters of San Mateo County made that choice.
Good times. Okay. Well, with that, I think I don't have anything else. I'm going to ask for a motion. In a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.